spelled Gyotaku. Starting in the very early days, we had cavemen who did rubbings of their hands. And so this was a very early beginning of nature printing, as far back in, natural history in caves. And of course they may have done rubbings of, other natural things. But these are some of the earliest forms of nature printing, was the cave prints of prehistoric men hands. Or it could have been women, sorry. As we progress, back in earlier days, in Europe primarily, and also in the Middle East, you would have nature printers create what they called pharmaceutical prints. And you know how in different areas there are common names that vary from one area to another. And of course then later on we had the development of scientific names. But your earlier pharmacist, if you will, your herbalist, would create nature prints using plant leaves and roots and flowers, and they would make books of these to compare what herbs they were using to use for medicinal purposes. And so I was very fortunate to receive an appointment at the Kew Gardens, Royal Gardens in London this last September, where I was viewing their archival plant print collection. And this is their largest print that was in their collection, that was a present from a gentleman who collected it in Japan. And you can see from where I'm reclining on the table, so to speak, how large this print was. And the people at the Kew Gardens did not know how it was printed. They tried, using the brush and the roller, and they weren't getting any results. And so I told them how it was done. Because we have a nature printing society here in the United States. It was formed in 1981, I think. And over the years, we've had a variety of foreign printers, including Japanese, that have visited and showed us their techniques. The way this large leaf was printed was by spraying the ink on the leaf. They use a pump sprayer. And then the fabric or paper is then laid on the leaf. And then they use, instead of their hand, like I'm going to be doing tonight, they create a dauber using silk and cotton. And so you can see actually kind of a daubed pattern from stamping the dauber on the leaf. And that's how that large leaf was printed. What's interesting about this particular leaf, I researched it when I was there, is because it's so large and it's kind of leathery, sometimes they would cut it and use it for an umbrella. Most people don't realize that in our own early history, Benjamin Franklin proposed using plant prints on our currency, because the venation in leaves are unique, just like our own fingerprints. So there's no two exactly alike. And so at one time, this was proposed to be used for American currency. Ha! I've enjoyed doing plant prints and vegetable prints over my career, and some of which, these were croton leaves that I printed in Costa Rica. And it took me 4 days to figure out how I was going to get the color and retain the vibrancy and the texture of the leaves. And so The paper that I printed them on was actually a locally handmade paper made from banana fiber. So these are some of my plant prints. Years ago, I created a very large poster for the Valley Growers Association. And so they gave me the list of the plants, vegetables, that they wanted included in the poster. And so what's printed in this are the spinach, the onion, the carrots, the grapefruit, the green pepper, the oranges, the celery, the jalapeno, and let's see, did I have the onion in this one? We had lime. Anyway, so this was created for the Valley Growers Association, and then they made it into a large poster that year and presented it to their members. A continuation of some of my nature printing are these lovely fern prints. I was very lucky to be invited to New Zealand to have an exhibition and lecture in New Zealand. And ferns are very important to their culture because, ooh, jeez, what was that? It's because you're so close to the speaker. Oh, okay. I was not becoming a rock star. And so the reason ferns are important to the New Zealand culture is evidently during war times, if a enemy walked through certain fern groves, the ferns would curl up, or they would react, or they would close. And so there is a lot of history behind the ferns in New Zealand. In keeping with doing these from their botanical garden, the perimeter that I embellished these fern prints were actually hand-carved antique wood pieces done by the Maori indigenous people. And so those are also rubbings of hand-carved wood. So what's nice with nature printing is anything with a texture and your imagination, you can, create a rubbing of. I enjoy wine, and so I don't want to get too close to that again. And so going to different vineyards, I started collecting some of the different varietal grape leaves. And then I discovered, who knows that the different grape leaves are shaped differently? Did you ever think about that? Well, they are. The Chardonnay leaf is different than the Merlot or the Cabernet leaf. And so I decided to create this tablecloth kind of as a travel log of some of the vineyards that I visited up on the Pacific coast. And this is washable. You can print with fabric paints. And so to create clothing or multi-purpose pieces. And like I said, I wrote down the different vineyards I went to and the varietal grape that I stole. Does anybody have any questions about some of the plant rubbings that I've shown?
Well, I do have one quick question. I think the plant rubbings are very interesting. I wonder if you ever use any natural greens or berry juices or whatever to do some of the...
Yes, you do. You can. And what you do is essentially you take your paper or your fabric that you're going to print with. And when you're doing plant printing, it's slightly different than what I'm going to be doing with the fish, in that you have your fabric or your paper down flat, usually on a surface that's padded, you know, with a texture that with something that has no texture. And then you would take your leaf that you're going to be using, and you would lay it down and then put whatever you want to imprint it on. And then you hammer it.
Okay.
Okay, so you exert extreme pressure to essentially press the juices from the leaf or the plant into the paper or fabric.
And do the colors come out true to the plant you're pressing?
No. Some of them Some of them change. They chemically, you know, it's just like when you read up on plant dyes, how something may be in the plant, it's yellow, but when you use it as a dye, it turns purple. You know, it's that type of thing. So it's not true to what the plant looks like. So you need to research that a little bit.
It must be fun to try it, though.
Oh, yes. And then I decided to wear this piece because it's a contemporary piece. And it has flowers. It's done on silk. Flowers and leaves. This one I actually created in a workshop in France. That's one thing that's nice about nature printers. We just go all over the world to work. And so this is done with the printing of, like I said, flowers and leaves on silk. And there again, this is functional art that, you know, you can wear. And because it's silk, I would hand wash it. I wouldn't put it in the washing machine. But I have a set of sheets that are probably 30 years old that I printed with orchids. And the fabric is falling apart. The printing is not. So this can be a very durable, you know, art thing. And it doesn't take a lot of materials to have to carry with you if you want to travel with it and create something to remember your excursion with. As you can see, it does pick up a lot of detail. And it can be a very sensitive, if you will, art form. So, any other questions about plant printing? Yes, ma'am. On these pieces here, the fabric paint was all put on the leaves. And I usually use a brush, a soft brush. You can use a brayer as well, or a sponge brush. So there's different ways of applying the ink to the surface. These are none of the ones that I brought tonight are pounded to create the natural dyes that are within the plant material itself. Did that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Tiny info the open half of your grape leaf in the middle, the big one.
Yes.
Is that like actual size?
Yes. Let me see what does that say? What species it was. You want to wash them to get the sizing out, because sizing tends to repel the ink, you know, and you're trying to get it to absorb into the fiber. Any other questions? No. No, most of the time, you know, they're just been washed, and then I iron them to prep them. Any other questions?
You just used to fan this pressure, or do you use bricks?
I use primarily my hands. There are some nature printers that walk, what they do is they have two boards, and they'll have the board, they have the padding, they have the whatever they're going to print, the leaf or flower they're going to print. Then they have the fabric. Then they may have another layer of felt or soft material. Then they have a board, and then they walk on it. And sometimes they drive over it with a car, you know. So that's what I'm saying. You know, you can have fun with this stuff and then see how it squishes. Anything else? Okay, let's talk about the fish printing. That's pretty funny. Okay, it's called Gyotaku. It originated in Japan, which is very unusual because most Oriental arts are, where does it originate? China. This didn't. The folklore on how fish printing was born was that a fisherman had gone, fishing, and back then they didn't use a stringer, they used a tote bag to put their fish in. And he happened to have some candy in his tote bag that kind of dissolved against the side of the fish. And then when the side of that fish lay back against the side of the tote bag, he noticed that it left a print. And that's considered to be the birth of fish printing. It then became a popular media for the shoguns, which were Japanese kings, to have records of their catch done by printers. Much like, keeping trophies today, having them mounted, well, they would have rubbings done of their fish. One thing that I really enjoyed, I did learn how to do the fish printing. My dad was in the Air Force, and he was stationed outside Tokyo. And that's when I was studying to be a marine biologist, because I didn't know anybody who made a living in art. And so I was very lucky to see an exhibition and demonstration in Tokyo of fish printing. And I went, oh, wow, cool, creating art using fish. And so, yes, I came back and I started printing, and I did the traditional black ink on handmade paper. And this is one that I just completed before Christmas. This is a gar. And as you can see, it records all the detail. If you look at this closely, actually, let's walk on that side so they can see up close and personal. Look at the texture of the scales. I mean, that is extremely fine detail. That shows you how well this technique can record delicate textures. This is done on a very fine muslin. So it's 100% cotton. Even the teeth. Well, when I was inking it and rubbing it, they printed along with the rest of it. So the traditional method is the black ink, the sumie ink, on the handmade paper. And because this one was large, yes, I do have large paper, but I thought tonight I'd just bring the fabric piece. And for years, yes, I printed in the black traditional way and a number of different things. These are, so what are these? Little octopus. Oops, sorry. Ding. So this one I printed at a nature printing workshop that was up outside of Boston. So you can see how much detail that this, and these were done on paper. I was very fortunate that several years ago, I was invited to the International Crane Foundation in Baraboo, Wisconsin, and I printed whooping crane feathers. And they're illegal to remove from the foundation because the bird is protected. So you can see how much detail, you know how fine a feather is. So you can see how much detail, bless you, how much detail that this technique can pick up. And then I used a handmade paper for the printing on this piece. So after printing for a long time with black and white, you know, you kind of get bored with that and you kind of jump off the cliff. And so I started adding some other details. This is an early print that recently I was able to, a friend of mine went to a resale shop and offered it to me, and I said, yes, I'll take it. And so this is sheep's head. And then back then I had added the color pencil seaweed, if you will, the seagrass. And so this is when I'm starting to transition to adding color to my pieces. And then I go back into doing, you know, just adding color to pieces. This is a snook that I caught down in the Brownsville ship channel, and I printed that in full color on black paper. And of course here we have the redfish, and it's still very simple. You know, even though it's done as a stringer, it's a very simple background, and it's very just the colors of the fish presented in its natural state. Then I started going into more elaborate backgrounds. So this is a poster I created for Earth Day, Bay Day. So we have not only fish that are printed, we have the crab, and we have the scallop and the starfish, and we have the shrimp, and we have the feather. And that's all when I'm getting into, quote, my natural history phase, where I'm creating underwater scenes using invertebrates along with the fish. And there again, it's keeping it interesting for me as well as for my collectors. Another one in that kind of natural history genre is this one with the piggy perch. You know, we all go fishing on a pier. So I decided to make a whole series, a pier series, in which I would do different, I guess you could say, structural designs with pier pilings. And of course, we have our wonderful bait stealers, the piggy perch, you know, going after the shrimp where we're hoping to catch something else. And so I did a whole series of pieces involving pier structures and colors and different fishes. I think the largest one I have is almost 6 feet. 4 by 6 feet. And it's like the fish are under an oil rig offshore, and I use big 40-inch redfish on that. After doing natural history pieces, then I started doing more abstractions, doing abstracted backgrounds. We didn't bring any of the other ones. Okay. This is with different watercolor and also handmade paper that's been marbled, and then I collaged the redfish. And so I have been doing a series of essentially abstract paintings with a lot of energy and dynamics, and then working the fish into the designs. So there again, that's another level that keeps me fresh and interested in doing this now over 50 years. Do you have any questions about some of the fish that I've shown so far?
I have a question. When you're doing your prints, does the eye transfer like that, or do you have to?
Yeah, I print my eye. I mean, not print it, I paint it. However, there are some purists that will carve an eye and then print it, stamp it on their fish. So you can be as anal about it as you want. Yes, ma'am.
I've noticed in many of your work you have like 4 Japanese characters.
Yes.
Next to your name. What are those?
That is my name.
That is your name in
Japanese.
how neat.
Not Chinese, Japanese.
Okay.
And it's phonetic spelling. The top is dai, then it's na, then bo, and the last figure is man.
Very good.
Thank you. I have several different chops. That was something that I treasure. My father had them carved for me while he was in Japan and traveled, and so that is the kanji is my name, and then I have some other ones too that he had done out of stone and horn that I use on some of my prints. Any other questions? Well, now we're going to go into, we talked a little bit about the contemporary pieces that I've evolved to. And up here I have a selection of a variety of different critters. So, yes, stingrays can be printed. We have this one here, and it's collaged on a handmade paper that looks kind of like sand ripples. This is a marbled paper. Then I printed the stingray on this one. Yes, I did remove the spine because I did not need to have that drama. And we have shrimps. This is a brown shrimp. We have 3 primary species, actually 4. But this is a brown shrimp. We have pink and white, and of course then we have the rock shrimp. But this happens to be the little brown shrimp that everybody likes to eat. And it's good bait. Fish like to eat them too. The shrimp were printed on paper, and then they were collaged onto the background. As I said before, you know, your imagination is your limit. So this is actually a rubbing of a meteorite slice. So you can go and print fossils and rocks, and something that I've actually used because the texture is very interesting. Have you noticed the texture on the bottom of your tennis shoe? That makes for some interesting printing as well. So that's a meteorite slice. I'm reaching a point in my career that now I have a bucket list of species that I want to do. This is one I was very fortunate to do just a couple of years ago. You know, Texas has a alligator hunting season, and I wanted to print a large alligator. So it was like waiting for the baby to be delivered. I had my bag packed and my fabric ready. This is tie-dyed fabric, and this gator was 8'6". Sorry, got tangled up. The gator got me. So this one's 8'6", and I did a 10-foot also. And I was very fortunate that I actually was able to get the skull and the hide tanned from this gator. Yes, it was during the season, and let me show you. There's the tag. And no, nothing goes to waste. They skin them. They send the skins off to be tanned. The ladies are there filleting the meat off, and so the meat is processed and used to cook. And yes, they do keep the skulls, and they have them cleaned, and they're sold. This operation is actually out of Eagle Lake, Texas, El Campo area, and he has a year-round operation where he removes nuisance alligators and relocates them, and then does guided hunts during the season. But something else that's interesting, he has a breeding farm, so he collects the eggs. And do you know that the sex of the alligator is determined by temperature, by heat? So if he has a museum that wants females, he knows to heat the nest up to a certain temperature. If they want males, then the temperature is kept at a different level. So that's how these amphibians are generated in male and female. What was so creepy is these are so hand-like. You know, when I was printing the feet, they just resemble so much like a hand. It just kind of, you know, printing the rest of it wasn't creepy. It's just dealing with the hands that were gross. The skinners were absolutely wonderful. You know, they power washed the gators for me to get all the slime, you know, and the algae and the mud off of them. And then they would move them to dry ground for me to be able to work on them. I don't pick these big things up. They usually have staff that moves them around. And of course, you've got some alligator hunters coming in. I need to do this on Duck Dynasty. You know, that would be such a cool thing. Anyway, so we had some of those type of people walk in, and they said, "Oh, you want to print us too?" And I said, "Lay down."
So with something that is that large, do you lay the cloth over it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like I do the fish.
Rolling it back and forth.
Oh, no, there's no rolling it back and forth. No, you'll see how I do it, because that's the same way I do the fish. However, it usually is a multi-person thing.
Yes.
So I would have me on one side and somebody else on the other side, and we put the fabric down. Then I do my printing, and then the same thing with lift off, because you don't want it to smear. So, Yeah, on the big stuff, as I mentioned to a gentleman earlier, there's a couple of YouTube programs showing my printing a almost 800-pound tuna, which it's on the Facebook page, and so the finished piece was 12 feet. And then I was recently filmed again on Texas Country Reporter. They came and did filming 30 years ago at my gallery, and then they chose to come back for their 50th anniversary program. And same people, thank you. Same people, same videographer. You know, it worked out just really nice. They did a great job. Let's do the tarpon. I mean, here we are in Port Aransas. I try to record the colors that you would see in the natural living fish, unless we're trying to match the sofa. Yes, sir.
Do you photograph your fish so that later on you can go back and make sure the colors are really well?
Yes.
That's hard to perceive.
It's not, it is for commissioned pieces. I like to fish, so I kind of know what colors they are. Yes, that is correct. Yes. Oh.
Ma'am, could you please hold your artwork still?
Quit flapping in the wind.
I'm sorry, I get to harass you.
Yes, you can. So like I was saying that, you know, some of these are bucket list items. This is another one. I was very fortunate to go to the Amazon. And did you know there's 7 different species of piranhas? We caught them. We ate them. They taste like brim. They're delicious. And they go well with beer. So I printed these when I was staying at, then was the largest tree house hotel in the world. And it was called Ario Towers. And all the accommodations were 10 foot above the ground because the Amazon floods. And so I chose to create scenes using some of the tropical foliage along with the piranhas. And what's neat is there's 2 arms of that converge to make the Amazon. And this was done, we were staying on the Rio Negro, and then there's Rio Blanco. What's the big plus about staying on the Rio Negro is because of all the tannin that makes it dark brown or black, discourages mosquito growth. Yay. And here's another trophy sailfish. I've been fortunate to do the 2 state record blue marlins. The first one I did was some 30 years ago, I guess, or more, caught off of Port Isabel. And then more recently, the one that was boated and then taken to Rockport, I printed the tail of that fish. And the tail alone is almost 5 feet tall. kind of a nod to some historical information, if you will. This piece, I decided I wanted it to resemble the pier. So I used a weathered pallet, a wooden pallet, and removed some of the boards. And I like to celebrate female anglers. And this is a print from the museum collection that I've hand colored. And they catch tarpon underneath the pier. And these baby tarpon were netted underneath the pier. And so this was one of my original pieces I created kind of with that feeling, with the mixed media, with the pier and the angler and then the rubbing of the fish. Okay, that brings us to what y'all really came for. Any questions before I start? Yes.
So the paper printing that you're doing, you made reference to different types of handmade paper.
Yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, are you finding some of the paper is more conducive to printing than others?
Always.
Okay. And so when you're going to print something, do you already have it in your mind as to what weight or what paper you're going to use?
Yes, to a large extent, because I've been doing it 50 years and have experimented with quite a number of different papers. Most all of my papers are handmade. Originally they were all from Japan, and then you have countries like Korea and Thailand that, well, they've been making papers too, but they just were made more available to the U.S. than they were, 50 years ago. And there are French papers. And what's unique about the handmade papers is the fiber is long enough that when the paper becomes damp or wet, it does not tear. It's not like toilet paper, which kind of dissolves once it becomes wet. So these papers have good wet strength. There are some papers, also depending on what the end use is. Some papers are harder, they're more brittle, so they're going to print differently than softer papers. Some papers print better with oil-based inks than other ones for water-based inks. They all, because you're wrapping the paper around the fish and the fish is wet, for the most part, all of them are going to stretch so that there is some wrinkling, if you will, when you go to frame it. But that's a part of the property of the art. Some people like to have their prints flat, and so they can be mounted, and like the Japanese do their brush paintings, how you see how they're mounted on the scrolls? Well, these can be mounted as well. So yes, I'm always on the hunt for papers whenever I travel. When I went with a girlfriend to Korea, I came back with 100 pounds of paper, and customs were kind of, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm not going to roll it and smoke it. I'm just a hobbyist. But they just had fabulous textured papers. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask, can you recall if the tarpon that's at Castaways for sale is on paper or less than paper? It's beautiful, by the way.
Okay, let's see which one is it.
It's about a 4 foot. It's like that. I think that was fabric.
I can't remember if it's fabric or paper. I'd have to look at it. I know that their marlin is on fiber. I mean, it's on, yeah. Yeah, the marlin is but I can't remember if the tarpon is, yeah. And then they have, now they do have a very large tarpon at the bank. American Bank has a very large tarpon in their lobby, and that's on fabric. Now that's a big one. Any other questions? Okay, let's get to the, yes ma'am.
Are you entering the Earth Day Bay Day contest this year?
I'll have to see. I've actually had 3 posters made over my career. Yes. Actually, that one is the last one that I designed for them. And then this one here was the first one. The other one I created, I also do biological illustrations. Like she said, what launched my career as an artist was illustrating the book on fishes of the Gulf of Mexico for Texas A&M Press, which was a 3-year project and 130 watercolor illustrations. And what I'm very proud of is this book is the longest running reproduced book in A&M's collection. It's gone in. They had a second edition that Hosey and Moore did several years ago. Dr. Hosey now is in his 80s. Richard Moore is retired. I think he's in his 70s. But they've asked them to do a third edition because the number of species that have increased in the Gulf of Mexico, and do you know why? Why have the number of species increased? No. 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 Yeah, what's the reason? Bilge had a, they had to introduce lionfish. But what's the principal reason for the increase in number of species? Think about it. No. What makes artificial reefs? No. Oil rigs. Oil rigs are the principal reason for the expansion of the numbers of species in the Gulf of Mexico, because the fish are always looking for habitat, and those oil rigs are what provide that. So just remember that. That's why when I was on the team to design the Texas State Aquarium, that we featured the legs of an oil rig to educate people about the influence of what that artificial reef has provided to the Gulf of Mexico. Its habitat, its structure from the top to the bottom. So you have the upper level fishes, the mid-level, and the lower. And then you have the growth that grows on those legs and the associated species that come and live and eat on that. So that's just a little bit of natural history.
To answer the question on the tarpon and castaway that was on fabric. Okay.
Thank you, Betsy. Any other questions? No, I haven't. There's no reason why you couldn't. I've painted on parchment. I've, created images on them, but I have never printed with parchment. Aha. I mean, it's pliable enough. And you can form with it. So why not? Yeah. Any other questions? Well, this fish was provided by my son-in-law, and it's a speckled trout. The scientific name is Synozion nebulosus. And so the way you treat your fish when you get it is you want to get the slime off, because it's slippery, and it becomes stinky. And we don't want scratch and sniff prints. So, you can use a gentle detergent to, wipe, wash the slime off, and you blot it carefully because you want to not disrupt the texture of the scales. Y'all can come over here. You can bring a chair if you want and come up close. I'm not going to bite.
And Dinah, you're planning on doing multiple prints?
Yes, I'm doing more than one. So I washed it back here with some liquid soap, and I kind of looked it over because sometimes your fish do bleed and sometimes your fish do poo, and so you want to take care and be a little bit aware of what's going on with the physical characteristics of the fish. So I like to position them with a little bit of flip in the tail. And it's interesting, doing it so many years, you start noticing different characteristics in fish and discrepancies within the same species. What I noticed on this particular trout, it has a whole lot more dots than a lot of them. The one with the spine is called the hard dorsal, and the fin behind it is called the soft dorsal. Usually on the speckled trout, there's more spots on the soft dorsal, and the hard dorsal usually doesn't have any. This one does, which is kind of interesting. Something else that is different is the spots almost fill up the whole tail. Usually it stops about midway on the tail, but this one is real spotty. The same thing with the distribution on the spots going toward the head. Usually it stops about halfway on the body. This one extends all the way almost to the gills. So that's kind of interesting. Do you know why it's called the yellowmouth, or why they get a yellowmouth? It's yellow, but why?
Diet?
No. Something else it does. These have not grown yet. Guess what else it grows during certain seasons of the year? Canines. It'll usually grow 2 canines, and the mouth gets very yellow when it's breeding. When it's through breeding, something that happens, the mouth is not quite as yellow, the canines fall out, and on old females or females are the ones that build the nest. Did you know that? They actually beat a nest in the sand with the tail. And so I've gotten some to be printed, these big monsters from Baffin Bay, and their tail is almost like a nub because they've just beat it so briskly to build a nest that it's deteriorated tail. And then afterwards, then you'll see these little spring-like filaments where the tail is starting to regrow after, the breeding season is over. So these are just kind of interesting natural history tidbits about speckled trout. So let me see if he's bleeding or pooing. To deal with that, usually I stuff pieces of paper toweling, which I'm going to do right now in the gills. To catch any blood. And I've got the mouth kind of the way I want it. And so now, this is just some insulation board that I'm using, that I'm going to pin it to. I'm going to extend the fins, and position them, and I'm going to anchor them with these T-pins.
Stick out, or do you push them all the way down?
I push them all the way down as much as I can. Sometimes fish are real fat, and you can't really get them down. So then sometimes I support the fin with additional either rolls of paper toweling or modeling clay. The same thing with the tail. I'll position the tail and I'll just put a little straight fin in there so it doesn't move.
Dina, quick question. Let's say you're printing fish. Is it more advantageous to catch a fish? Do I need to let it just kind of chill out for a while before I print it? Or how much time before catching and printing is optimal?
There isn't really. I mean, unfortunately, I had one. That's another story, but I'll talk about that. You can keep it in the ice chest, and then you can wrap it, collapse the fins, wrap it, and put it in the freezer, and then thaw it so that you can position it, and then you can start printing. You can print it fresh. The main thing is getting the slime off and plugging any holes that might be leaking or pooing. And then for blood, you keep dabs of hydrogen peroxide for blood. Yes, ma'am?
Is that fish gutted?
No, it's whole. You can use gutted fish. You're going to need to stuff the cavity with paper toweling, So you want to make sure, you have a good side where it's not damaged. Sometimes the scales are abraded, or if you're using a billfish, one side may have a gaff mark in it. So, you may not want to use that side. So you look for the best side of the fish to work with.
Do you take photos of them, Shirley, after you land them so that you have true coloring?
That's best, because the fish, the lights go out when they die.
They do. And I know frozen ones that I have had, like a trout or, frozen.
Yes.
It's different. If you freeze it,
Yes.
you keep it any amount of time, even in a little bag in chilled water or something in the refrigerator, it changes.
That's right. The melanophores contract, and so that color goes away. And so, like on the range of color on, say, speckled trout, you'll have some of them that, this one's kind of silvery, and usually they have a very good violet flash on the head. That's kind of disappeared now. And then sometimes they'll be almost black. Sometimes they'll be bronzy. They're not all silvery. Sometimes the tails and the fins are more yellow or camel colored. And then the edges of these fins are different. They're edged more in black tones, charcoal, rather than just white or silver. So that's some of the idiosyncrasies in each fish that you should record, because literally the lights go out after it's been dead a while. Okay, these are just, regular kind of soft brushes. They have good, kind of a little bit of spring to them. You don't want something that just lays over. And these are not expensive. They're chip brushes that you can get at the lumber yard. I prefer the ones with the wooden handles, not the plastic handles. Then you can swing into the more elaborate artist brushes that you get at the art stores. There again, it has a fine bristle, so that it will leave as little bristle artifact on the fish while you're working. You can use foam brushes, so you can use what feels comfortable to you. Okay, on this fish, I'm going to start with the silver. No, this is water-based block printing ink. It's what I prefer. And this is a little stiff. So because it's stiff, I'm going to dab it in the water. loosen it up. And then, so I'm going to start. Okay, it's not cooperating. Let me get another tube. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, sometimes the temperature affects the inks. So this is water-based block printing ink, and there's different varieties of, I guess you could say, manufacturers that make block printing inks. They also make oil-based inks. Like I said, you can use acrylics, you can use watercolor. Just be aware that they dry fairly quickly. That's better. Something else that's interesting is not, excuse me, not all the fish in the same species print the same way. Some fish print better than others. Don't ask me why, I don't know. It could be climate, it could be hormones, it could be, the temperature. But sometimes the scales cooperate better on some fish than they do on others. What I'm doing is I'm putting on pretty much a thin coat of this silver on the whole fish. And then I'll be blending other colors onto it. Usually the first print is kind of a test print. That way you're seeing where the fish is bleeding or pooing, and then it's not well saturated with the ink yet. So it's kind of a test print to see how the fish is receiving the ink and making sure it's well saturated. When I'm first applying the ink, you see I'm kind of brushing back and forth. That's just to distribute the ink evenly on the fish. Because when I do the last brush work, if you will, I will go against the scales because I want to lift those scales. I want them to be more prominent. I'm lifting the fins out since I did not pin those. Those are lifted out. Like I said, I'm trying to distribute the ink as evenly on the fish as possible. And something to be aware of, there are some fish that, do you know what deciduous scales are? They shed them, which is a pain. So you have to watch. The worst one for shedding scales is ladyfish. I mean, you just look at them and they just come off. If you're printing outside, you need to be aware that when you go to print that there isn't a fly on the fish when you're printing so that it leaves a spot. Okay, so now I'm going to add a touch of black because I'm going to start blending color. And I'm going to add a touch of blue. Oop, a lot of blue. And I'm going to add a little brown. just to warm that blue, just a hair. Okay, now the blending starts. The fish needs to be inked each time because when you do the rubbing, it lifts the bulk of the ink off the fish. Unless I'm going to do a school. And so I will print it consecutively. Okay, now I'm checking the fish, see that he's still shiny, because if he's not, that means the ink is dried, and then it's not going to print as distinctly as we want. And then we want to check to make sure we haven't been messy with the inking. So you can put pieces of paper under there and then just pull them out, or you can do like I am, which is just going around and kind of wiping away any over inking. Okay, feel your paper. Your paper has two sides. You have a slick side and you have a soft side. I print on the slick side because the soft side sometimes can stick to the fish, and then you it'll stick and then it'll tear. Let's move them down so we don't get that in there. Let's see, what are we going to do? Okay, I'm going to do a school, so I'm going to have, and you can see I'm printing blind. Put him up like that, and the next one's going to be following him. Okay, can you see what's happening? He's just wet enough from defrosting. That it's coming out. Okay, the tricky part is you're working from a narrow area going toward a broad area going toward narrow area. You're going from the body to the head. Make sure you get the fins. See, that pin is creating an issue. So guess what? I'm going to take it out. What's neat is this, like I said, it's such a delicate process that, sometimes fish have parasites, and those parasites will leave scarring or indentations in the scales. And this technique will register those critters. Years ago, when there was gill netting going on in Laguna Madre, I would get fish that had scars in front of their hard dorsal where they had been caught, and then was able to escape from the gill net. I reach under and I pulled out that ventral fin, that pectoral fin, and printed it.
Did you
Yeah, to hold it and to support it. Okay, now, when you remove this, you want to go from the head to the tail. Why? So that this hard dorsal doesn't catch your paper and tear it. Okay, so to finish this, yes, I paint the eyes and the spots and put shadows in, but that's the bulk of it. And now I'm going to print a second one because we've got a school going on. And I'm going to use, that way I'm using the last bit of the ink. How do I want this? Let me count the ways. I'm going down. So this is just taking off the remnants of any residual ink, and that shows you how much, I've taken off the first time. And we were lucky he didn't poo on it. And he didn't bleed on it. This one is called Seishu White. There is a Seishu Natural that is more of like a vanilla color. And we can talk about later on if you want to ask me about some of the papers that you see. Some other things printed on. You can ask me about those because that's what's so exciting. There's so many different types of papers to experiment with, and they have different textures.
Is there different weights for your paper that you're using?
The different species of paper has weights, are so many, ounces per square, whatever's. So yes, this particular species of paper, no, this is kind of it. This is the weight.
Changing subjects, have you ever had the occasion to print butterflies or?
Yes. And snake skins. And scorpions. So see, that tells you how much of the ink on the first print came off. And so then you just have a shadow of the second one. That's why it's best to re-ink each time.
Did you alter the shape of the head? It looks like it on the first one, it looks a little more, or is this the way that it's printed?
It's the amount of ink that came off the first time, and there was just not that much ink left on it on the second print. It's bony, and so most of the ink came off when I printed it the first time.
Well, I can take it off the hand if you don't think
Any other questions? Now, something else that causes a variation in the printing is how wet the fish is. If you notice, this one's kind of wet, so the next one is not going to be. And so this has kind of a watercolor effect going on, as you can see from the back, how wet it is. So the next print will be crisp, more crisp than this one.
And how many times do you use that? Just continuously as long as you keep painting?
Yes. Now, some fish, are just have bigger, stronger scales, like drum and spadefish and things like that. Their scales are thicker, and so you can use those more. The delicate ones are like pompano, butterfish, mackerel, things of that nature. Their skins are much softer, so you can't get as many prints. Any other questions?
Dinah's going to print one more, but I know we're coming up on 8 o'clock. I just want to point out that we did bring a number of her artwork pieces. A number of these pieces that are here tonight are for sale. We've got more prints on the table back there. We also have the coffee mugs that we did this year that has her artwork printed on it. All of the art sales tonight will benefit the museum and the Historical Society.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have any questions about any of the prints, come on up here while I'm inking and printing, and feel free to ask.
And also, some great shots, so if you didn't have a good view, I'll get this up on our website later. You can go back and review and see up close details.
And if you're interested in having Dinah print one of your fish, I've got piles of these around the room. What is Gyotaku? And then on the back are the instructions for how to process the fish to get it to us.